So we're already late today in starting. You know that, right, James?
Are we? Were we supposed to start last night at 9 p.m. the regular time?
Well, okay, well, let's go back there in a couple seconds. We just met up here online over the last half hour, and I think we spent most of said 30 minutes figuring out what was wrong with my board
It was only
because
one dial, huh?
it
One
was only
dial.
one dial, right? So here's the story. And this is and when you hear everything in full as James and I sit around for this space heater chat, you'll probably figure out why we started late and the mistake I'm about to tell you about. So, on the new board that I bought uh, back in November, it's a Rodecaster Pro. There are 8 dials on it, or 8 levers. I guess let's say dials. It sounds better. It sounds more audio professional, I guess. There are 8 dials on this. 4 for each of the microphones. You can hook up to 4 microphones on this. 1 dial to listen to the audio or monitor the audio coming straight from a external source, probably a computer. 1 dial designed specifically to come from a phone if you have a phone directly hooked up to it. 1 dial for a Bluetooth device. And then 1 final dial for anything going outside, like the sound pad that rests on the Rodecaster Pro. Basically, you can hear sounds like that. So for the last half hour, I tried to turn on the Rodecaster and couldn't hear James through the Rodecaster. I figured I had all the dials up, and I did 3 of 4 of the dials, which I thought the sound would be coming through those channels. So, of course, the dial that it's supposed to be coming through, the channel that's supposed to be coming through, is the one I didn't put up. And it took us almost half an hour to figure that out. Okay, I'm being too hard on myself. 15 minutes.
The good thing is, Mike, we didn't have to turn on and off the computer. We know that's always the solution. Or you
Sure, but
couldn't fix it.
I ended up logging in and out of Zencaster, and I ended up power cycling the Rodecaster twice, and then checking all the connections, pulling out all the cord, pulling out at least the USB cord once.
We didn't shake the Roadcaster. You never know.
No, no.
Shake it for luck.
This is
Uh,
okay. Where do we want to start today? Do we want? I know we'll get to the anime stuff, the pop culture stuff a bit later, and this is par for the course for anything we do, any recording we do. We always talk a little bit about real life coming into each episode.
I heard
What part?
spring is in the air.
Not looking
Mike
outside.
and the Bluebirds are playing again. The Jays, and I hear the
Well,
Jays. They're looking. They've been making moves since the lockout ended. So it's going to be interesting to see them actually play if they stay
well,
healthy, and maybe to
yeah.
actually see some games too, right? Because they're actually going to be in Toronto, and we may actually see some games at the Skydome.
Well, full season, yes, not games beginning in August. But you said it is spring already. We are taping this on Sunday afternoon, March 27th, but you wouldn't really know it's spring when you look outside, at least today.
Yeah, March and April can
Nice.
be fickle, right? They can go up and down. But yeah, it went really cold again. It went really warm and the rain washed away the snow, and now it's gotten cold again, below
Well,
zero.
it's gotten cold and a little bit of snow.
I saw a
A
salting
little
truck go
flurry
by. They
action
were
this
doing some
morning.
salting on the roads for some reason.
As of this moment, the current temperature in Toronto is -4 degrees.
and I'm sure the wind
to go
chill is
far.
even less.
Oh well, yeah, pulls it down even less. So we are talking, I guess, in the if we're talking Fahrenheit, we're talking into the 20s easily. I'd say mid 20s,
Sounds
roughly
about right. Into the
mid to low 20s, I guess, if we're talking Fahrenheit. And it's you're right. It's typically unpredictable weather for this part of the world at this point in the year. So yeah, -4. I think barely the freezing mark today here in Toronto, which makes it a perfect day to clinch a World Cup berth for Canada. They'll be playing in a couple
Jamaica.
hours at BMO Field against Jamaica. Any result, as they say, a tie, a win, it'll clinch Canada's first berth in the World Cup and second altogether since the original one back in 1986.
Yep, in Mexico, and they didn't even win a game in Mexico.
Didn't even score a goal in Mexico, but people came away at least satisfied because
They just didn't realize we weren't going to qualify for something, and we were going to hit those lows because we never even cracked where we are now in the rankings like we
well,
did for the
here's
last few years. We've been like in the 90s and probably even below 100.
what's their current ranking? I think it's in the 40s now, right?
We might have just got into the 30s,
Okay, but
high
I know
ones,
it's
but
past
you
50.
never know.
I know they're within 50 again, I think. So there's some certain poeticness that would happen if it happened against Jamaica today. Just and this is for reference, okay? This is just kind of going back in the time machine, and we'll tie it a little bit into the into some anime stuff a bit later on. The Before this qualifying run, I think the best run Canada had in World Cup qualifying was like in 1998 when they got to the final 6 there. The
Correct,
final
and they had a good run until the final octagon, and they just kind of
Oh,
fell
well,
apart. And they have a great story on Sportsnet about that
yeah.
too. It's
It's not
insane.
in 98 it wasn't an octagon, it was a hex. It was a 6-team final round, right? This time around they CONCACAF changed the rules. The final round will contained 8 teams, but back then it was 6. Canada was there. They got to that was the last time they got to the final round of World Cup qualifying, and I think if memory serves me right, they didn't finish well, obviously they didn't qualify. I think they finished last.
They
But I
did
know
finish last. Like it was like if you read the Sportsnet article, like some of the spots in Central America, like it was rough. They had
yeah,
their
I know.
luggage stolen. They had like literally lockdown of stadiums. Like everything was put against them and stuff like that. They were
Sure, I
not
think
on
locked out of stadiums
flights
since
or
12
any. Like it was like a
straight.
school bus that was rickety, falling apart to get to
Yeah,
certain places,
rock. It was obscene.
altitude and stuff like that, and then the vicious fans, like fans throwing everything at them, like literal
Really a lot of
sh.
yeah, a little bodily stuff at him. One of the key moments I think that stuck out to me from that 98 run was their games against Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, keep in mind Jamaica would ultimately qualify for the 98 World Cup. I think that's been their only appearance in the tournament.
Mm.
And Canada lost their games against Jamaica, or at least didn't win them. I know that one of those key games was, I think, again there in Jamaica itself, and they lost rather convincingly. It was one of those key moments where when I remember watching it, I knew Jamaica was good enough to make it, and they did. So there's some poeticness. That's not really a word, but it's a little poetic that Jamaica or Canada has a chance to clinch in the next couple hours against Jamaica
On home field, just like they
on
did in Kingston, I guess, way back when.
yes. So and make no mistake, I'm very confident that it'll happen in the next couple days. I'm very confident it's going to happen, and quite confident it'll happen today because they're pretty good enough to at least get a draw. And Jamaica, frankly, has struggled in this final round.
And they do
And
have the home fans behind
mhm.
them, unlike in Costa
And
Rica, where it was definitely quite a hostile environment. And there
and
definitely were some players on the Costa Rican side, basically egging on the Canadians, even
oh,
though they had,
they jonesed out that they hustled for that red card against K.
yeah, basically we lost a player due to theatrics, in essence. It was
Yeah,
like,
they
man,
they I'll give them a little credit. They needed that win because they remain at least in contention for the fourth spot at the end of qualifying, which would at least get them into an intercontinental playoff against likely New Zealand. At
mhm.
least we think it'd be New Zealand.
It was kind
So
of interesting because that's the Oceania region, and ironically, there's one country that is technically, well, it should be in Oceania, but isn't in the Oceania region, and
they
that's Australia for some
they
reason.
lobbied
They're
they
in
lobbied to get out of there. They
they're in
lobbied.
Asia, and they're no longer in the World Cup
Did they
because they got beat by Japan.
Japan?
Japan
Well,
went to Australia and they beat them, so
yeah, and
Japan did.
Japan. Yeah, on that note, Japan has qualified for the World Cup in the last couple days.
Yeah, they beat the Aussies
And
in Sydney, I believe it was,
yeah, it
and they
was. I
qualified.
think it
And
was.
so it's weird that
Yeah.
they're in the Asia
Well,
region.
they thought it would be easier for them to make the World Cup if they went into Asia. I guess the profile is good too. But the thing is, like when that happened, what 10 some odd years ago, a lot Canada joked, or there was a lot of jokes in Canada that the country should try and transfer from CONCACAF to Oceania because all they need to do is just beat one playoff because they were at least good enough to get out of Oceania, even for as brutal as Canada's soccer team was known to be. So, this is what Australia wants. I think they're good enough to make an intercontinental playoff too, but I think that would be against a South American team.
Or Central America, I think, because the
The Central,
Intercontinental comes from CONCACAF to face Oceania.
no. Oh yeah, for Oceania, I'm talking about what Australia is facing.
hmm
Australia will face somebody from South America. Oh wait, they still have to. I think they're the two third place teams in their groups in that zone. They'll face off for the right to take the playoff spot, and then that one playoff spot will face somebody from South America.
hmm
So really, Australia did not make it easy for himself. That's another story altogether.
Could have been worse. It could have been the Italians. I heard there were quite a
Oh,
few angry Italians on the Thursday and stuff like that. North Macedonia just put a knife through their heart.
wow.
You heard about that
Oh,
one
I
too?
know
That
about that. I saw.
they didn't
I
qualify for the last World Cup. They win the Euro against England, and now they don't qualify for the World
oh
Cup
yes.
again. It's like,
Oh,
damn.
you're saying this so proudly as an Englishman, James.
Uh, but I think they said that this has kind of happened before and stuff like that, so it's not
Third
unheard
time in
of. But it
history. Yeah,
definitely
third time in
not a
history.
friendly thing to have happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the third time in history that a team who won the Euro did not make the World Cup afterwards. And I think the last time that happened, it was Greece. Nobody expected them to win the Euro, so maybe the fact they didn't make the 2006 World Cup afterwards because they won in '04, nobody was totally shocked. This
Yeah,
is something else altogether,
yeah. Getting into the World Cup from Europe,
right?
because remember, there's
And
a
then for
lot of
Italy to
soccer
miss
powers in Europe.
two, count them, two World Cups. I really don't need to finish the sentence, do I?
Not really. I think the Portuguese are still in the running and stuff like that because they
No,
were they
actually,
were they were
if
like Italy. They didn't get out of that first round, and they had to go
well,
to this round to try to get in. And it was
keep in mind, yeah, they were in a path as they called or pathway. Keep in mind, if Italy did beat North Macedonia, they would have been facing Portugal for that spot.
and that's what they were looking
We
for the head
don't-
to head, right? So
yeah. And that would have been probably the highlight of this round of qualifying anywhere in the world. Alas, that's not to be. Portugal's not complaining, I guess, because they beat Turkey 3-1, and we'll face North Macedonia for that spot. North Macedonia, good on them. They will be underdogs against Portugal. But I'm sure Portugal understands that they're capable of an upset, so they'll probably bring their best foot forward. I expect them to get that spot. Anyway, so sport. Anyway, I want to at least acknowledge the soccer stuff here.
Yeah,
We
I
have
guess we'll see how it goes, but it's
sports
going to be
based.
interesting because it's going to be in the fall because of where it's being held, and it's another one of those oddball places that FIFA decided to randomly give it to Qatar,
Well,
and I'm not sure how many fans are going to be traveling to Qatar, to be honest with you, and those
um,
stadiums are going to be mothballed just like we've seen before, right? In other places like Brazil and that.
I was about to say, well, we've done Space Eaters talking at length about the Olympics. So take a lot of that what we've said about the Olympics when Mo and I talked about it back in the summer, and then transfer that a lot of that conversation over to FIFA as well. Not all of it. It's not one for one, but we're on the same track here.
And remember, they had to get shamed by a lot of people just to say, probably we shouldn't be letting Russia continue on with qualifying, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Because Poland, Czech Republic, like all of them, and I forgot, was it Sweden or no? I think it was Sweden. All of them said because they were in those purviews of having to possibly play them. I think Poland was the next in line, so they get a bye now. But they said we aren't going to play them. We aren't going to play Russia,
Yeah,
and they
all
had
right.
to literally be shamed and say,
Oops, give
okay,
me a
now
second.
we will disqualify them from holding the Champions League in St. Petersburg. We will disqualify them for qualifying for the World Cup and so on and so forth. But it's
Mm-hmm.
crazy it took them that long to do that.
Yeah, that's sort of it. So yeah, I don't know. Okay,
But hey, at
well,
least we can watch Canada if they qualify on the TV, right? And I think
I
they'll
think
score a goal, right?
it's
Unless they
I
get in the group of death, I think they'll score a goal. How does
they
that sound
you know
for a
what
prediction?
they could if they're in there and they're on good form, they can probably play with the rest of them, play with the best of them, so to speak. So they'd be up for that challenge, I'm sure. Like because they'd have nothing to lose going in. And don't be mistaken. Don't kid yourself. If my opinion is there will be a fair number of Canadian fans to try to venture to Qatar to if when Canada's there, they will try and see their games
And
without
I'm
a doubt.
sure Davies will be there too because he's starting to get better and stuff like that on his end too. And Bayern
It
Munich said
is,
that as well.
yeah, they are, and it looks like it'll. Cross your fingers, he'll be back in April. Cross your fingers that he's good in the long term. Okay, on that note, since Davies got myocarditis with COVID after having a bout of COVID, and then people talk about that. Um, or maybe we should save this to the end because I think it ties in with the stuff we'll talk about concerning the podcast itself going forward when we are done at the end. Okay.
Oh,
Can we
okay,
save that for a bit later?
sure.
Okay, let's get to the anime stuff almost 20 minutes in.
So I heard Discotek had a Twitch stream on the 14th. That was
Yes.
a couple
Okay.
of weeks ago almost.
I don't have too many takeaways from it myself.
There was some interesting
I just saw the
announcements. I think the big takeaway, the big announcement was their final announcement, and that was the first season of Digimon being picked up by them to release, and that they're going to use oh AstroRes. Remember they had talked about AstroRes and using it for Project Echo before they found those masters. So they're going to use AstroRes
basically
on
a
Digimon because it is a
yes.
Digipaint show, and they were
Yeah.
showing what it looked before and after, and so it's going to look
Yes.
pretty good when they do release it.
They got really technical again. I mean, it's par for the course for Digimon, or par for the course for anything Discotek does. Right?
But
They
this will be
really
the first release that has an AstroRes finish and stuff like that. But there's a lot of fans
just
that are probably going to be happy with this
oh
one,
yeah,
and it
no
got
doubt
the
about
biggest, I think, bump on social media. That's for sure, and they
it.
have done. a lot of other Western cartoons. Like they announced Double Dragon in there too,
Yeah, I
so
was
they're
about to get
getting
into
into that, which is interesting.
I was about to say for the listeners out there, explain AstroRes who aren't aware of it.
See, that's
Like in a
it's very hard because even they admit, and Justin Savakis admits, he's not sure what the heck is going on. It's witchcraft because he said originally they approached Justin Savakis, Media OCD, and all of them and said, "Hey, would you guys like to try this out and use it?" And he probably brushed them off like, "Okay, come on, there's nothing this is going to do." But in essence, it takes those, I guess, digipaint shows and those SD shows and stuff like that, and kind of gives it a new coat of paint and kind of brings out, I guess, the um, the film or whatever you want to call it, and makes it look better and stuff like that. And I'm not sure what exactly how it works. It's like obviously AstroRes, their team, they have the more technical know-how, and I guess you could look. I think they now have a Twitter account. They do have a website supposedly. If you go there and just Google AstroRes, probably you could find out the more specifications of how they make it happen. But it definitely looks a lot better. Sometimes when it's doing, because it's obviously algorithmic and stuff like that, there may be some little things that don't turn out quite like you want, but for the most part it looks like the colors are popping better, and it looks like you're getting a cleaner, more
yeah, I was about
stable,
to say the
better image,
lines look
right?
clean, no jaggies, so to speak.
Hmm.
A lot more finer details come
Yeah,
out.
some details come out with the colors that you didn't really realize before, as they say.
It's like it's not really upscaling. I mean, this is better. This has the potential to be better than that, right? Just and it's going to be probably an important technology because of the way old cartoons, especially in the aughts or things in the aughts, might have been rendered.
Yeah,
So
with
this type of stuff will be this technology. So AstroRes could be really important. And people said, I think Rurouni Kenshin, the original television series, was done in a way that it wouldn't look good if you attempted to remaster it for um for Blu-ray. So it would at best be as SDBD,
yeah,
right?
SD Blu-ray, and so some of those SD Blu-rays, if you feel you could get the audience and stuff like that, and it's worth the push, you might give it the AstroRes treatment and try to release it just as a Blu-ray, kind of like what they're doing with Digimon, which obviously they have the fans and stuff like that. And it looks like it's coming along quite nicely, and it'll be
Hmm.
their first test case at market, and I'm sure they'll get feedback and learn from it as they go along, and then we'll see what ones they decide to do next. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess the short version of it. Is the Twitch stream, is that Twitch presentation still up? I know they don't keep them up too long. I think it's
Yeah, it
because
might still be up, but you never know. So you can go and try and see if it's still in the archive, and it might be, but it's not a guarantee that it will be there. They talked about other ones. Like I know another one that they were going through and doing was Darkstalkers OVA.
yeah
That
they
one
did.
they are doing a new HD upscale, and it's not something I would buy, but I know a lot of people of the Street Fighter variety and of the Fatal Fury variety. They did great Blu-ray upscales of that. It looks like they're doing that again with Darkstalkers, and supposedly that one they are soliciting for May, and it sounds like already on Amazon.com it's up there in the sales chart, and that's not anime, that's just in general. So the video games are
The
still popular.
Oh yeah, still. And the other one that stuck out was they picked up the other two Project Echo features.
Well, I think they only said talked about the second one. And the likely scenario is that if you got the first one and it was in the vault, so to speak, that the other two, the second and third one, were in the vault. It was just a matter of time, and people were pestering them about it. But they finally announced the second one. It's not going to be as full packed as the first one, but it's still going to be like the dub, the sub, and then the great video quality there. And then as well, they probably are going to have some liner notes and things like that, so that'll be nice. And then later on, at some point, they probably have an idea in their internal schedule, but we'll hopefully see the third movie on Blu-ray. I'm sure we will at some point. It just depends how they are able to get things along their schedule because they have a lot to release every month, like 5 to 6 discs, and some of them are quite a lot of episodes. Like some of those ones, like Shaman King, and even that Digimon one coming up, and even Sergeant Frog, the second set they announced in this stream too. Those ones, some of them are SD on Blu-ray, some of them are Blu-ray, but some of them are like 52 episodes on a disc, and that's still a lot to go through.
No kidding. Yeah.
But
What was the ultra violent one that they mentioned?
oh,
It wasn't
that
Infamous, was
was
it?
Violence Jack. And
Oh
so
yeah. Oh,
Violence
that's
Jack was interesting because it's the first time it's going to be uncut, unmosaicked. And I feel like when manga did it,
when
they
you're
kind
saying
of said it was uncut, but it wasn't uncut. And even the DVD they had, I don't think they ever said that it was uncut, but yeah, manga tried to say it because it was quite violent, even with the mosaics and things like that. But this time, uncut, and it's going to be on Blu-ray, and it looks like it's going to be quite good. But I think the announcement, as you said, was interesting because it's so ridiculous that the best they could do, they had a content warning, but it was just someone cussing out Jack for 10 seconds.
yeah,
Right to
and they
the
said
effect.
and they joked. I think that's all they can safely show,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, when you know something, this is going to be interesting when they say when you hear the words unmosaicked, which tells you a lot about. Well, okay, what was mosaicked? The only other, aside from the obvious, I think the only other time I saw anything mosaicked in an anime I watched was certain scenes in GTO years ago, and that was just as a parody, right? Just to make fun of it.
Yeah, that was as a parody, but these were for the real deal. And I guess the other thing is manga
Of course.
entertainment, and then I guess even Critical Mass, right? Stuff, they had done it as well before.
Well, yeah. The joke I made years ago was that's the first time I've seen a mosaic in a regular anime. The only other time I've seen mosaic in anime is in hentai, and then someone cut me off and said, and Neil quickly cut me off and said, "And how would you know that, Mike?" So
But they talked about other things too. Like we heard, because there is a tie-in, the original Devilman is coming to Blu-ray, so they're getting old stuff. Some of the streaming stuff they had announced before coming. So Kakashi, which had been on Toonami, and then two other ones. Cyber City Oedo, that was in
yeah,
the vault, and so they're doing like they did with Angel Cop. They're going to do a steel book of that and release that, and it'll be a really good transfer. They also said the director, that was one of Yoshiaki Kawajiri's OVA in film. So Kawajiri is going to be supervising that transfer, the 2K transfer, and they're going to get that out at some point. And then the other interesting thing, because it's a new line for them, Nihon Nights live action. They're going to be getting back into live action, and that's going to be with Uzumaki Spiral, the live action that had been done
yeah.
in the early aughts.
This is the same Spiral that was made into an anime years ago. Is it the
Uh,
same title, or it just shares the same title? And since they're
it
doing
shares
different
the same
books,
title, but that Spiral is a different one. That's a mystery
okay.
series based off of manga. This one is based off of the manga of Junji Ito. So it's a
Oh, that's
horror.
right. Yeah.
It's a horror movie, horror manga, and the reason why it's good timing is
Well,
Adult Swim is doing an anime of Spiral Uzumaki for this year, and Junji Ito is involved in that too.
I was about to say, well, Junji Ito is a thing right now. I mean, you talk about him a lot.
And
Kevin talks about him a lot.
it'll be interesting to see from this what other live action ones they're going to be bringing to Blu-ray, and maybe some other ones they may bring back, because they did do the Lupin the Third live action, so maybe they could bring that back too to Blu-ray for the Nihon Nights brand.
Well, sky's always the limit there. But yeah, but when you think about to, Discotek, I was about to say Tokyo Pop. When you think about Discotek, they are old school in many respects. They appeal to the collector as always. It's and they appeal to the that whole Japanese mentality of collecting physical items. Right? I think we've kind of talked about some of those things before. Like anime for as much as it's gotten well into the streaming side, and we're going to talk streaming again in a couple minutes. It's its real appeal is to its very very well educated fan base, right? And they like their physical media. We like our physical media when we can.
And definitely with the help of Justin Savakis and the team he has built at Media OCD, they have kind of helped Discotek become that Criterion line, and even
Yeah, that's a good word to. That's a
Tool
great
being in
comparison.
there helping out with notes and
That
things
is a
like
great
that, going
comparison.
to Reed Nelson for the Lupin the Third stuff, and even Brady Hartel helping out, making their packaging stand out and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Criterion. That is a perfect way to put it, actually. Right?
hmm And there's other ones they had there, like it was very packed. Like the other one they had was the 1980 Astro Boy
Astro Boy,
release,
yes.
and that's going to come out in May. And it's going to
And
have
then
the
you have the
University of Wisconsin dub, because that was the authorized one by Tezuka Pro and Tezuka himself. And that supposedly the Cine Lume dub from Montreal is not going to be there
I'm
because I
gonna
guess
put it. Oh, go ahead. You complete the sentence, but I have a story there.
because I guess they must have, I guess, showed it on Canadian TV and stuff
Yes, they
like
did.
that.
That's
And
what I
I
was about to
guess when they sublicensed it, they decided, hey, we'll just dub it, and they dubbed it in English and French, I guess, and that's where they did it for Montreal.
Yeah, the story there. Okay. This was in the early 80s as well. I remember watching this as a early morning cartoon before going to school. Um in the and this was when I was, very young. My sister was into watching Astro Boy, and she was in kindergarten at the time, so and you would only do the afternoon classes. And she would I would have to leave before the episode was done, but she got to watch the whole thing. So that was my first exposure to Astro Boy in the mid 80s, the dub of this series.
Yeah,
That
the
was my
color
first.
version, as they call it, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. So it was like I wondered what happened to it, and okay, great. This will be kind of interesting to see because I think one of the catchphrases for Discotek is bringing back your childhood or something like that,
Yeah, no,
right?
they definitely had everything from every decade. They had some more mecha stuff. They had more stuff that were fan favorites, like Sinfo Gear. They rescued another NISA title that Justin Savakis had worked on in Fuse Memoirs of a Hunter Girl. They did talk about more Lupin, the third stuff, about bringing the first part out in May, and then another license that we knew was coming because TMS had already dubbed it and already showed it and sold it through digital things, which was Lupin the Third, Prisoner of the Past. And that one has the one opening I love, the one with the voice, like the voiced one, which was from part two. It's the second opening, which is great. So that's a fun one to watch. Lupin the Third, Prisoner of the Past. They talked
Mhm.
about Case Closed, Fist of the Blue Sapphire, which is another TMS one that they had done a dub for through a subsidy of the Japanese government, just like Prisoner of the Past. And so that one's coming from them too, and that one I know has been online from TMS as well.
Yeah,
And
it's so fun to like. I don't watch Lupin, but watching those scenes, it's really cool, really enjoyable to watch.
I wonder about that because you have in that one, ironically enough, you see them running away from Zenigata and stuff like that. He's chasing them. And then you have Fujiko up in this attack helicopter just
Yeah,
throwing down missiles at this unsuspecting little village to stop Zenigata from going after them. And that village does not look in good shape after she does that. Just a little
it was
domestic
just fun to
terrorism.
watch. Yeah, it was just fun to watch. To say, like, needless to say,
Yeah, no, I
and
watched it with some people that had bought the version. That was
Like this
digital
isn't
to own, and it was a good movie. And I watched this because they had sub and the dub and stuff like that. And TMS has done a lot for Lupin.
where do you know what services they bought it from?
Probably Amazon, because I know it was on Amazon and stuff like that for the
Digital to own,
digital to
right?
own. Yeah, and they've done that with some of the case
Like
closed movies and
I
specials that they've
fully
done.
admit curiosity. It's just I don't give myself time, and I'm increasingly getting less and less time.
And
Like
TMS, I know for some cons they had done it like as, oh, we're doing a premiere of this and stuff like that. And then later on down the road, Discotek will usually release it. That's not a guarantee, but they've done that all the time for the case closed movies and for the specials of Lupin the Third that TMS has dubbed themselves, and they've done that with the help of the Japanese government for the J lot subsidy. And they even did that for the part one too
yeah,
of Lupin the
it's
Third.
just there's a part of me that actually wants to go at least on like are they what's are they on any other streaming services right now? Just jog my
No,
memory a
those
little.
ones unfortunately are not on the streaming
Yeah, so
services. So, so
they're
for the
unpurchased,
Lupin specials, those ones they did for TMS and the case closed Detective Conan movies and stuff like that, they haven't put them on streaming or anything of the sort.
which would have been interesting and cool. But
And
what can you do?
and
That's just the
even
way
the
they are.
Lupin the Third Part One, which was interesting, and they mentioned in the stream, the one that's on HiDive that has the new dub that's going to be on the disc, and that version of it, the video quality, they upped the video. They went back in again, of course, like they always do for Discotek, and upped the video quality again. So it's going to look very pristine on that disc. And as they joked, they said TMS for a lot of the Lupin stuff and other things they've done with them when they do those kitchen sink type things and really do good by the video and things like that, they ask them and say, hey, could we have a copy of that for maybe using in the future for maybe a Japanese release? So they said that's a nice tip of the cap.
Yeah, always is.
And then
Okay,
I know they talked about other things. Moncoli Nights, they
but
finally got
yeah, just
everything together and
let's go
released it.
through like any final takeaways.
Yeah,
I'm
so
a kind
Moncoli Nights is finally coming, they said, which is nice. And then the other thing is they are still, as we saw, releasing Crunchyroll stuff because Homes of Kyoto is coming out later this year too. So I think there's still some licenses from or sub licenses from Crunchyroll that'll come out from them sub only. I don't think Funimation will affect it too much because obviously Sentai and Viz still have some stuff they have to release from their deals and stuff like that. But I guess we'll see how that all goes.
yeah.
And then the questions are always a fun time, right? I'm sure that Kevin and a few of the others, and they answered the Canada question, which is we'll ask the boss and we'll see how it goes. But it's probably going to be a long
Still,
solution to try and figure out distribution in Canada. And as you probably were talking about, Mike, there were the questions about licenses even before question time about ones that you know were never going to be in the cards. I saw people asking about the Hajime no Ippo season 2 and 3 that Crunchyroll has. And of course, Monster. They want to know about the Monster anime, and that was never going to be in the cards and stuff like that. I'd say they could get Master Keaton before you get Monster.
they could get Yawara before Monster,
I would say that too. Oh boy.
right? I was about to say Yawara at some point. So perfect. Thanks for helping me with that.
But it's going to be interesting to see what pops up as we go along. But they do have a great catalog. They are bringing some of their old DVD stuff to Blu-ray, and they're bringing back classics from, as we said, 70s, 80s, 90s, the aughts, and even stuff that hasn't made the jump from the last decade from Crunchyroll over to the fans and given us a good quality for money and stuff like that. And some of it's even the old mecha stuff. So they have something for everyone, it feels like.
Yeah, they do these days. But that's why it's always a lot of fun to watch their presentations. And as I said, there's some very knowledgeable fans who watch it, and they're very technically inclined. So doing that long explanation of AstroRes was, I know, of fascination to a good chunk of people who watched that because they would understand it. They would get it.
And there's still, and since we're at the beginning of the process and Digimon's going to be the first one, it'll be interesting to see how it all turns out and stuff like that. But so far, it looks interesting. And they're very
That's
impressed too. So I guess we'll see how it goes, and maybe we may see it used in other projects too. As they said, it all depends on what they find in the different vaults, right? Because that one vault that Robert Woodhead found and helped Discotek get to found quite a few titles they thought were never going to be possible to upres or use in 2K.
yeah, and I guess we'll learn a little bit more about that because they really haven't talked about what titles they did find or everything they found in that vault.
Yeah, they said there's Justin Vegas
They're
said
very
there's more in the vault, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. So stay tuned. Next stream, maybe in a couple months.
Yeah,
Okay.
because as they said, they have. I think Justin Smith. They said Selby, the owner of Discotek, they might have like 2 years, year and a half of licenses. So they have a lot of licenses they got to go through, and so they have a long timeline of hey, this is what we have to get out and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out, right?
Right, exactly. I'm really curious. And I think these presentations like they kind of really started happening during the pandemic, but expect it to be something you'll hear or see a lot more of anyway.
No, I
And
think they
it's going
said
to continue.
it'll continue on along with the panels when Mike Tool goes to different cons and stuff like that. They said obviously we'll be at Otakon again, but they might you might see them at some other cons depending on how the schedules turn out, right?
Right. Okay, you want to move on? We're
Yeah, we
ready to move
can
on?
move on to Sony Crunchyroll Funimation or whatever we're calling it, the one-eyed monster or whatever.
Well, at least since you want to use the metaphor of a monster, uh, somebody you want to get out of the way of it, I guess, this week. So, word came down this week that Crunchyroll will pull, or a handful of titles will be pulled from the Crunchyroll service by the end of this month, which is in a couple days' time.
And that's the first one, and that is in relation to a lot of Sentai Filmworks titles. Pretty much all of them are Sentai Filmworks titles that are coming off of Crunchyroll. Not all of the titles Sentai either previously had or has are coming off, but a good chunk of them are leaving and stuff like that. And some of them are stuff like To Love Grew, School Live, Kids on the Slope, Himato Umaru-chan. So there's some smaller titles, bigger titles, and stuff like that.
Food Wars is the one that caught my attention.
But it's a sizable chunk. There are some other ones. Oh yeah, Monster Musume is on there. So there's a lot of things, and some of them have been on there for a while. But they're all still on HiDive. So I think
Yeah.
some of it too is AMC. They've probably closed that deal and stuff like that, and it's a matter of trying to drive traffic to their service. I think too.
Yeah, and to make it look more desirable for their eventual rumored sale as well.
And then there is the other thing, of course, that there are still some titles. So I'm guessing, depending on what contracts they had for the sub license for streaming, at some point, some more titles may come off, and then they'll still be on HiDive. There's some titles, don't forget though, that it isn't from Sentai. It's probably from the studio. Like, you know how you go into Crunchyroll, it gives you an idea of where that license came from. So sometimes they'll get from the Japanese themselves. So for example, Space Brothers is still on Crunchyroll, and I think that was from TV Tokyo or the Japanese licensor themselves. And then Sentai did have the license, but supposedly at the moment it's not on HiDive, so they don't have the license for the TV series anymore, and they've discontinued the Blu-rays and DVDs for that. So the only way to watch is on Crunchyroll. So luckily there are still a few things from them on there, but that's from the Japanese licensors themselves,
Yeah.
like Space Brothers.
Well, I guess we shouldn't have been too surprised.
Yeah, I
At
figured this would happen at some point, right? So
I mean, with all streaming services, things go on and off from them, right? I mean, we're talking rather spectacularly. Disney put up some of their are starting to put up their Marvel series that they did with Netflix on Disney Plus. If I'm hearing that correctly, they're just
yeah,
not. They're just putting so not barely mentioning the Netflix involvement. because I think they were producers at the time.
Yep, and we'll see. Some of that, more of that, I guess, will come even as they add the age gate and stuff like that on there for Disney Plus.
Yeah, as I said, it just doesn't really surprise anybody, or okay, any of us who would be regularly around the table. We kind of get this as business, so it kind of doesn't really neuter or do anything really horrible to Crunchyroll. They have plenty to work with anyway.
And they still have other licensors that aren't obviously in the streaming sphere that will give them content and stuff like that through sub licenses. Like Discotek has not all their titles are out there for stream, but they give stuff to Crunchyroll, to Retro Crush, and stuff like that. And then Noizomi, which is Right Stuff, they still give stuff to them as well, and to Retro Crush, and even on their YouTube channel.
Yeah,
And when
so we're
Funimation was still, well, they're still streaming Funimation, but they had given stuff to Funimation as well in regards to Right Stuff as well. So
yeah.
I'm sure those relationships will continue and stuff like that. But if you have a streaming platform already, then it probably didn't make sense for them, even with the bigger footprint of Crunchyroll, and that's even bigger now because of merging in Funimation, to have that there and say, okay, we'll just put it on to HiDive. And the other thing is those licenses, it's interesting how it affects, because some of them might not have been just US and Canada, they might have been other regions too. So that would probably hurt them more, is that those other regions would lose those titles for Sentai.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a interesting perspective to take because Crunchyroll is very much a global brand. That's why Sony opted to go with that name going forward instead of Funimation. I
And
mean,
that
I got into conversations with some of my younger colleagues about that. They don't really recognize, like, we're of a vintage. Me and you, James. We've been around long enough. Although I've been around long enough to remember watching the Astro Boy series.
I was gonna say, I'm sure they don't remember Pioneer and Genion and Bandai and
Mhm.
ADV, and it goes on, Steamline.
Right? Yeah, and they're so we understand those brands, those names, and recognize them, and maybe some of their historical significance to fandom. Funimation being the original, like being Dragon Ball,
And Yu Yu
and
Hakusho on that, yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of younger fans, I would say, yeah, who are or recent fans wouldn't really understand the history of a name like Funimation nearly as much. So they're not surprised that at all that it was Crunchyroll. Frankly, I'm not either. I'm not totally sure
I,
about you,
I, I
James.
think a lot of us were surprised, as we said, it was the international play and stuff like that. Some other
Hmm.
people tried to say there were other things at play, that maybe Funimation was a more tarnished brand and stuff like that. But I think they wanted the more international brand, and that was
And I think
Crunchyroll.
they wanted, yeah, and I think they also wanted to appeal to that a demographic.
And I think it's the push towards streaming as well. And you could see that in a few things. Like there were other announcements this week, like they had these solicitations for Funimation for June for their physical media, and we found out Funimation as a physical media brand as of June is no more. It's Crunchyroll solicitations, and so they don't have any Funimation like name or logo or anything on the packaging for June. As of June, it's the Crunchyroll branding on everything. And the other interesting thing was, you know how we had talked about they had moved away from DVD, Blu-ray combo packs, and they were doing Blu-ray and a digital code in each physical package. On those June releases for physical media, there is nothing about digital, it just says Blu-ray. So maybe they're going to phase out those digital codes
Well,
as of June, and they will transfer over the stuff from Funimation to Crunchyroll, but it's only to do those existing digital codes and stuff like that that they had done under Funimation. They aren't going to do it anymore, which is interesting if that is how it's going to play out.
probably, consumers always want more, so I don't think there'll be some discontent. I think it was funny because I always saw the odd. I think in the Funimation Facebook group, a fan group, I would always see somebody put up digital code saying, "Okay,
Yeah, a lot
free
of
for the
people
first
would
person."
trade their
That's
codes and stuff like that and say, hey, do you want this code? Because they're like, I'm already subscribed, so why do I need this code? So they would try to give it off to someone else. Some people would sell them. Some people were very nice people and they give them for free, do a person a favor.
well, it was funny because some of them said, "I don't know exactly know what this is, but it's free for the first person who says." It. And then I see in the replies, "Cool, thanks," and then they mention the title. So it's just that's just the latest development in the whole Funimation Crunchyroll saga as Sony is pulling the strings behind the background.
It's
It is
interesting, though, too, because the June solicitations, there were only 5 titles for their June solicitations. And that's very rare for them. Usually they have a lot more, and they also have a lot of essential releases or re-releases along with their new releases. They didn't have any re-releases. It was just 5 new titles. So it's interesting to see if they're getting the feet wet and then they're going to ramp up again, stuff like that, I guess, with branding as Crunchyroll and stuff like that. And it'll be interesting to see how re-releases go.
yeah. Well, I was about to say it isn't just the re-releases. Remember, back on St. Patrick's Day, I don't know if I forwarded you the article, James, the Variety article that talked a little bit more at length about the Crunchyroll changes.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing that one as well, and I think we had talked about it. There was some interesting language, and I think we had heard that from Colin Decker as well, who was
Yes.
head of Funimation, which is now Crunchyroll. That he's now like CEO or general manager of Crunchyroll now, not of
Yeah,
Funimation.
it was one quote that stuck out to me when they talked about doing all this, and it kind of hints as to what they think will happen to the streaming service going forward as well. And it's this quote: "The thesis is quite simple. We aspire to be everything to someone, not something to everyone. We've always been by and for
Yep, and
anime
they
fans and
talked about
creators."
after that. Decker
Remember
said
when
our
we talked
business has
about
more in common with
the
fans of the
purchase?
NFL than users of Netflix,
We
and they've always talked about that about
Mhm.
they know anime and stuff like that, and they're going after those hardcore fans and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is still a dedicated group. May not be the most lucrative group, but it's dedicated with a lot of latent potential, right? I would
Hmm.
think anyway. But and we talked at length about this over the pandemic series about, hook them young, get that young demographic and make sure they remain loyal as they grow older and gain more spending power, and pass it on to the next, and have their families pass it on to the next generation, which is where we're seeing to some degree now, right?
And he talks about it too. He says it's like a lifestyle and stuff like that for some people, and that's what they're trying to go after and stuff like that too, with not just the streaming and the Blu-rays and that, but also obviously the merch and stuff like that, and video games and things like that. So kind of like
The
Japan,
medium,
right? With
it's
the
the medium.
with the
It's the medium
strategy.
we constantly talk about, right? Well, yeah, they're bringing that strategy over here in many respects. Kind of like we just kind of touched on it a little bit with Discotek too. It's How do I put this? Well, it does. Remember when we talked about the purchase last year? I also hinted, okay, could this also be a springboard for Sony to want to be able to do some of their more mainstream stuff, to use Crunchyroll as that platform for, as a streaming platform for their more mainstream stuff? I think that quote stuck out to me because I think it throws cold water on that theory. And I guess the thinking my I'm shifting my thinking to think any of their more mainstream stuff. And when I talk mainstream, we can also talk about their movies based on their video game IPs. Aside from their big budget films, it sounds like they'll just shop them around more so, but stick with Crunchyroll being very much for anime fans and things that they feel that would appeal to those fans, to their core demographic there.
Yeah, they talk
It's
about that throughout, right? And stuff like that
mm,
about how the big boys, quote unquote, tend to be hit focused like Netflix and stuff like that. But if you're a true anime fan, Crunchyroll is the only game in town. And we've heard kind of quotes like that coming out of Crunchyroll. And some of that is kind of, you kind of worry about that. It's kind of like the Bandai visual, remember, we know anime fan wants. It almost feels like that in some degree.
you think this could do you think this could blow up in their face, the strategy?
Like, I think they will still have people to go to them. They're going to have most of the big titles and stuff like that. And they also are able, and some of the Japanese, I'm sure, do not like it, where they put out a call for bidding and stuff like that. And they probably hold their feet waiting to see where it is and then try to bid just enough above and stuff like that. So they're not like pricing themselves out too much. You know what I mean? Spending too much money.
Mm.
But the
I
other
mean I
thing
mean
too is it goes into the last thing we're looking at, or we had talked about, is Crunchyroll now getting rid of ad-supported streaming, starting with the spring
that came
season,
down this week. That announcement came down this week.
and that's an interesting one on a few fronts. So some of their back catalog stuff like that, it's not going to affect that, but for simulcast starting with spring 2022, you will only get 3 episodes, the first 3 episodes ad support, and then if you want more, you're going to have to pay them. And the other interesting factor to factor in is, remember, for Canada, a lot of ours, they did it way, way before, where if you want to get stuff in Canada, you pretty much have to pay because ad supported here means, okay, you got it a week after, but then after a few weeks, all those simulcasts disappear behind the paywall, so to speak, because our ad revenue wasn't good enough. And I think Jesse Betteridge, I think he's talked about before and stuff like that, has noted, and I've seen it too, Canada is the only region they did that to for ad support streaming. They never did it to any other region in the world and stuff like that. That was probably even smaller than Canada, right?
Well, yeah, because well, really, there's a you can say what's the point in with a bunch of different angles. Canada doesn't have the doesn't with for its population, it's still big, but it doesn't draw you much. So what's the point? And then small other regions outside of the aside from the U.S., other regions, you can make the argument go the other way, saying what's the point? They're too small. Can't draw anything out of it. We'll just do their ads anyway.
And some of it I know there's been discussion on them halting ad support going forward. Now, obviously, at some point, I think if they're doing this starting with the 2022 spring season going forward, at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if it then applies to the back catalog for everyone as well. And it's interesting. They probably looked at the numbers to say this is probably for the best because remember, I think as of August 2021, they had put out statements saying they had 5 million paying subscribers and that they had 120 million registered users. Of the 120 million registered users, 5 million are paying subs, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
means 115 million at that point, probably more now. But then the other question is how many of those are not ghost accounts? How many of those are actually using their accounts to watch through ads and stuff like that? Because I know some people have said they haven't been happy with the ad support service where they're going through
It
and
can
it's
drive
the
you
same
nuts. I
ad
know
and
that.
it's like on constant ad nauseum and it's at random parts in the episode.
Anecdotally, it might have been why I ended up subscribing. Oh, so out of those, how many again?
I only had
How many?
115 million, I would say, because 5 million were paid subscribers.
Yeah, well, among those 5 million, I think we're two of them.
But I know the other thing too, as well, is that some of them probably, if they weren't doing that, as they said, they were then going to pirate their anime and stuff like that. And some of them were obviously outside the US and stuff like that because they weren't going to put up with that. And so it's hard to say. I don't think if they weren't going to do it before, they probably aren't going to pay now. But we'll see how that plays out for them. I think probably even without the ad revenue, they're probably still going to be okay. It'll be interesting in the future if they do like Disney Plus and a few others have talked about, which is add a tier, right? A very bottom tier where you pay a bit, but you still have to watch some ads and stuff like that.
The closest I think we have of that in Canada is just Crave, which is essentially the Canadian rights holders to HBO Max here and Showtime in Canada. They kind of adjusted their tiers. So their lowest tier, their $10 tier, which only at the time only got Showtime. Now they adjusted it so that the $10 tier can get HBO programming as well, but you can only use it on mobile devices. The $20 tier will get you everything. Will get you Showtime, HBO, and then you can use those on streaming devices and on televisions ultimately.
And that's the thing too, right? Is depending on, do you then restrict it for certain devices and stuff like that? Because some of them, as they say, that may go the pirate route or we're watching free, they may not be watching it on those higher end devices. They're probably maybe on their telephone or stuff like that, or maybe they are on the PC, but it's not as big a screen and stuff like that compared to those who are paying and stuff like that. Another factor might be, hey, the app is in other places. Hopefully, they will ramp up because supposedly some smart TVs do not have Crunchyroll on it. But I know Roku, those that have the Roku TV in or the Google Play on the TVs. I know Sony uses Google Play for their smart TVs. They have Crunchyroll on there, and a lot of people, it's like, hey, I'll pay, and that way I can actually watch it on the big screen and stuff like that, and get, you know what I mean, get that bigger
Yeah.
experience
Well,
than what you used to.
mhm. And just to add further to it, just to give another example one more time, and then maybe we'll just move on again after this. Apple Music announced a similar thing because they announced a lower tier. I think it's I don't know how much it is, but I don't think it's the $10 tier. So we're talking I think $5-6. But you can only access it through smart speakers, through their smart speakers, right? Through HomePods, I think they are.
But it's
But
interesting.
and but the thing is, you can't use the interface. You can't use any mobile any you can't use your phone or iPad interfaces that you would typically use with Apple Music. You can only access it through your voice.
Okay. Mm.
So you can't use the interface. You can't use your phone to interact with it.
But
Sorry.
there's a lot of interesting factors, and I've been toying around with some of the stuff that has moved from Funimation to Crunchyroll.
Oh
And
yeah,
remember, we were
anything
talking
documentary?
about home video versions and things like that, and how a lot of them that were from recent simulcast hadn't come over. Another problem is the simuldubs. I was looking at Jobless Reincarnation, and I was watching the dub of that. On the Funimation thing, they have everything properly translated when they switch to different languages, like the Beast language or the Demon language. But on Crunchyroll, all you do is you hear them in that foreign language and then have the subtitles in Japanese. They don't have the English subs like they do on Funimation. So they got to figure out a way to get the proper subs where they need them and stuff like that on some of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that could take, and if someone has enough things against them, they're just going to say, F it, I'm going to go and pirate. And some of those people that might have been free to try something out or take a look, if the ads turn them off or what have you, they might have just already been pirating anyway if they were in other countries and even in North America as well, for as all we know.
Right. But
But
this is as we're in so to speak uncharted territory in many respects.
I guess it's kind of like a pendulum in a way because I laughed at some of the comments I've heard here and there where they said
Give me
originally
a
when Crunchyroll started, they drove people to piracy, and now guess what they're doing now? They're driving people to piracy, but who knows?
It's a full circle concept, I guess.
Yeah, I think they'll
But
still have enough, and they'll still probably get a few more subscribers that come to them that have come
well,
from
they
Funimation and Wakanim and maybe some others that decide, you know what, I'll give them a little more and stuff like that, since it'll be the only streaming service, right? That a lot of people would
in
stream.
that sense. So
Because if they had to pick between streaming services, they might say, I'm just going to pick this one, and then the other one, I'll find another way to get that content otherwise. And sometimes that comes from sharing with family members, which sometimes that does go against terms of service. I know it does for Crunchyroll, but even that, they're finding loopholes. I'm sure
Oh,
you heard about Netflix with them
yeah.
testing
No,
that in
I was
Central
about to say.
American countries for the extra
Yeah,
fee.
yeah. So I'll say that, and because Neil, I share my password with Neil. Neil, if you hear this, you owe me a coffee every month, extra large, or I'll change the passwords. Um. Okay. Can before we start really close up on the Sony side, let's look. I do want to look ahead to this week because rumor is coming out. It's not really anime related, but it's certainly still on the Sony bandwagon. You think you know where I'm going, James?
I'm talking
When I
about
say
Spartacus, right?
right. So the rumor is Spartacus will be unveiled this week, and the speculation is high that that'll happen. And the speculation once again is out as to exactly what it'll entail. So I think it's like a 3-tier system
And it
to.
sounds like they're not doing what Microsoft has been doing, because remember, a lot of the big Microsoft titles they've put on Game Pass day one and stuff like that, and that's a competitive advantage because it sounds like Sony isn't going to go that route for their first party titles, the big ones.
Yeah, and the latest God of War is apparently amongst that, right? So what would so essentially it would be a merger of Plus and Now, right?
Yes, correct. And so we'll
And
see how it plays out, but at the moment it's still a rumor until something comes down the pike, whether it's a state of play or whatever. We'll see how it goes, and then maybe in the future, as we said, remember how we said, how is, I guess now Crunchyroll, since that's what all of their anime holdings now is, Crunchyroll, how that's going to factor in and stuff
yeah,
like that, and if that's going to factor in
I was really
Spartacus
curious.
later down the line. I don't think it'll factor in the next year, but maybe 2024 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was about to ask you. Okay, so with all that's going on the Crunchyroll side, could this figure into into the PlayStation services? Because we've constantly talked about, okay, it hasn't happened yet. It's meant to be. We keep hearing about anime being a big pillar, the fourth pillar, I think it was the term in PlayStation's uh, strategy going forward, PlayStation's plans going forward. So surely Crunchyroll would have something to do with would roll into PlayStation services in some formal way. We haven't seen it to this point, but because of all the uncertainty, so to speak, going on in the on that side of the equation, with with now the rolling of Crunchyroll and Funimation and all the consolidating going on there, maybe it's not ready. So just to repeat, you don't see it happening yet into the subscription services, but
There's a lot to be done, as we said, because we talked
you
about
could
a
see it
lot of
happen.
things, and there's still balls in the air to get done. So
So
even
you
by
could
the
see it
end of the year,
eventually.
that's a lot to get done.
Yeah, you could see it eventually happening, just not this year, much less this week.
Yeah, less next year even, because we got to see
It,
how it goes. And I'm guessing it depends how it works out. Is it going to be tied to just PS4 and PS5? Are they going to allow streaming to PC and stuff like that? Because remember, Game Pass, you do PC
oh yeah,
and
and the
to the
cloud.
different Xbox family members and stuff like that, Series X and then S and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right?
real cloud streaming.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll be curious.
And it'll
And
depend on the quality too, because it's still in its infancy for the streaming of video games. And we've seen even on the Switch with some of those ones, the quality sometimes isn't quite there. It's still suspect, and even Google has given up on Stadia and stuff like that. So we'll have to see how it plays out between Microsoft and Sony, because these are the two that are going to probably push that forward.
hmm well, as I said, I've always talked about, okay, in some ways they are competitors, but their long term focuses are on other aspects too, right? Like real like I think my we talked about Microsoft also with the Activision Blizzard purchase, really wanting to branch their gaming side into post console. Like we talked about post console strategies for Sony and Microsoft at length,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just to as a repeat, and listeners can re-listen to those episodes again. Our thoughts, or at least certainly my own thoughts about it. Microsoft wanting to be less console oriented and really push themselves into other avenues, maybe back into the PC side, certainly more into the mobile side. Whereas Sony, their post console strategy may be more anime centric. And as I said, we can have that debate again because it's still a fascinating topic. I think we can talk about it again at length at another point when a few more things become clear as time goes. Right, James?
Yeah, we'll see how it all falls out and stuff like that. And as we've heard, like there's tons of rumors and stuff like that that goes on even on the video game side, and none of it comes to pass, or sometimes it's months down the line and stuff like that. And sometimes things can happen in the world that cause things not to be announced. Like I know a lot of people are still hoping for GoldenEye remaster on Xbox and then GoldenEye on N64 for the expansion plus on Nintendo Switch to be announced at some point, because that's been heavily rumored since the beginning of the year. But given the way the world is at the moment, I'm not sure if GoldenEye is going to be there in the next few months. It'll probably be later on because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Because remember, Russians factor heavily into that movie, into GoldenEye.
Yeah, kind of a sensitive time right now. Okay, so and then of course, just as a quick aside, and maybe we'll talk about it later on. Remember, MGM was formerly sold to Amazon this week as well, or was it last week? But
Yep,
that deal was finally,
and
yeah.
that means
Probably
James
the most
Bond.
is now, James Bond is with that smile. Okay, so one other thing, one other piece of news before we really talk about where we're going as well. Anime North. I guess we have to once again risk our status just to talk about them for a couple minutes because we're, if nothing else, we're here to just stir that pot. They did make their announcements on their first two guests of honor for this year's edition. Two English voice actors, Richard Epcar, Ellen Stern, were announced. I mean, I'm just looking at the ad right now, and I did see the news. I didn't really get a chance to look at it too long. Do you have a word about that, or should we just save that for a longer discussion?
We can probably save it for another time. It's like I expected they would have not just
Oh,
maybe some Canadian guests, but maybe some American guests. But I figured if they are able to get a Japanese guest, it's probably going to be a virtual showing, so to speak, because I
I
think
was
that's
about
the
to say
best
if
you
they
can
got
do.
and I was about to say if they got a Japanese guest, it would be considered a minor miracle. Uh,
And I'm not sure about the US, because obviously we have some other cons that are going to be in person that are coming up, and I haven't really checked to see what type of guest lineup they have, if they've been able to get a Japanese guest or not, and if a lot of them are going virtual for that, because I have a feeling this year you'll see a lot of virtual Japanese guests until maybe the next year, till everything kind of flows to more of a normalcy, or to a spot where everyone feels comfortable. And then the other thing is they don't have to just get out of Japan; they have to get back into Japan, right? So
yeah,
you don't
we've
have
talked
just
about that.
restrictions for the country they're going to, but also Japan as well, because they have to get back
Yeah.
in the country.
Um, I think we joked around last episode. Okay, we mentioned that another set of registrations were about to start. Last episode we were on concerning comic market at Anime North, and I talked with Squirrely about that briefly, and the sense they're getting is sounds like there's a lot of rolling over for next year.
And that's what they had been saying, that a lot of those same people, they had in place a rollover. So I'd say most of the people who want to get in, I think, are relatively safe. It's just a matter of how they feel about the mid-July dates and stuff like that.
Hmm. But there's that, and obviously we'll see to our duties as an official podcast of Anime North. We're still, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in, when things continue to clear up. According to the Anime North website, we are 110 days away from the 25th anniversary of Anime North, July 15th to the 17th. Okay, so before we go, let's do some house cleaning here, James. Where do I start? Where do I want to start with the house cleaning here? Quick COVID update. I guess we should do that. We are there isn't really much to add in terms of the COVID stuff. I mean, I hope things are well in your part of the world. Things are at least calm on this side, although there's, with a lot of restrictions being lifted over the last number of weeks, there are a few concerns now concerning, will there be another rise in cases? I think hospitalizations are down again today, but there is still a concern. What does it mean going forward? I think the recent history of the pandemic has stated that whenever restrictions have been eased in any form, there's always an uptick of some sort. So the real question this time around is, if there is to be, or when there, with this latest uptick, and I think there's a certain inevitability about that. How much can medical systems handle? How much can the healthcare system handle? Can they handle it effectively? And because that's the question that has to be answered, and that's the question that will determine whether or not restrictions return, much less lockdowns. There's this talk about another variant that's there that may not be serious, that really would be a concern to people who haven't been properly vaccinated. And I guess we'll just wait and see how that kind of goes around. But but I will tell you now, as the OGs of this podcast, me and James, the easing of restrictions will also affect this podcast. Over the over the time of the pandemic series, especially within the last 6 months, we've tried to increase a little bit more of the quality and just invest a little bit more. If many hardcore listeners probably noticed, there's a slight change in terms of the podcast host. Over the last couple weeks, we moved away from SoundCloud, and now the show is now on Captivate. We'll put a direct link up to the episodes as they are on our Captivate website, animeroundtable.captivate.fm. I'm still kind of trying to learn a little bit of the lay. Yes, I understand. There could have been cheaper services to be had, but I just like the support services that Captivate offered, and I'm looking at the analytics. They're not. Of course, the numbers are low, but at least I feel they're more legit as well. And then on top of, atop from the plans to eventually do streaming, I know we haven't gotten around to that nearly as much with buying a subscription on some streaming live stream platforms, and the purchase of the new board, the Rodecaster. So yeah, the changes are still in play. It's just now there's a little bit more of a time frame to go. On a personal note, I've made the reference to not regularly having work over the past couple years as the pandemic has gone on. That's facilitated essentially the existence of this pandemic series. And by my count, we started the pandemic series at episode 18 of this current run of the podcast. We are all the way up to episode 64 in regular episodes, but then you put aside all the other recordings we've done. So we are talking more than 50 recordings easily. Probably more than 60 now, by my count or by my estimate. You tell me if I'm wrong, James.
That probably sounds about right. We did do a lot of recordings, and we were
Over the
doing
last,
more than a few times a month. So
yeah. And I do apologize. We are taping this 2 weeks after we did episode 64. And I'm just going to ask the listeners to bear with us for just a little bit. Because, well, as I said, I never made it a secret that I wasn't really working. That changed this week when my regular job called me back. So I'm back there now. And if I'm not going to hint what that job is, we've talked about it before. I've mentioned it in the past, or at least in one episode. But it is the type of business that will just adjust the way we're going to do the show for the next little bit. Until and so just like everything else we've talked about in the world, whether it's the regular world, the anime world, our own worlds, everything is still moving, a lot of moving pieces. So just bear with us. The end result for this podcast right now is we just don't have a firm schedule as to when we're going to be able to tape episodes. We got lucky today that we were able to tape anything, and that James had a little bit of time in his afternoon to be able to chat beside the space heater for a bit. So yeah, thanks a lot again, as always, James.
yeah, that's no problem. And one day we'll get together and maybe do something on Twitch, as you
Oh,
said. Then we'll power up that PS5 of yours.
yeah, well, there's still I still plan to, and we'll still I still want to take some time to at least introduce, like, give my impressions of how the PlayStation 5 is working out for me. It's just on another personal level, James. Um, I think I gave myself Nintendo thumb, or a video game thumb, because my the meaty part of my palm below my thumb and then my wrist, it started to hurt for about a week. I kind of messed it up. Well, Streets of Rage 4 is a button masher. Let's be honest.
Hmm.
So then I did myself no favors. I haven't really picked it up since. So we haven't really done that, and my hand is long recovered in that sense. But I will give a chance to play with that. And as I said, we're going to try and clear up, what the story is for us, and we'll try and you know, set something to be able to tape another episode in the very near future. There will be uh, something. It's just that we're trying to just sync our schedules properly to be able to do it. So, as I said, just bear with us just for a little bit. It might be a little another week or two before we do another episode. So I apologize to our listeners. I apologize to you, James. I apologize to you and the other you, Kevin, Mo, and Jeff on this one. So just bear with me, and then maybe we were able to make our schedules work together. And I know behind the scenes there's other stuff going on with the end of our SoundCloud subscription. There's a bunch of broken links on our website. We are looking to fix that. We are also looking for a refresh of the website. That's why I'm mentioning the Captivate website right now, so people can at least see the episodes as they are there. And I never got around to actually updating any links there for at least the last 5 episodes. So there's a bunch of other things we have to do, but life once again is getting in the way. What does this mean for the podcast? Well, I think I kind of said that. Have every intention to continue. No problem there. I'm going to stop short of saying this is the end of the pandemic series, though, because that's to also say, to be ignorant of what's going on in real life. The pandemic series is frankly ongoing, because the pandemic is ongoing. So as I said, we just ask both of our listeners for a little bit of patience for the next little bit. James, you want to add anything to this, or have I said, or have I? Because I feel like I've spoken too much in the last 10 minutes.
No, I think you hit all the points, as they say. It's you had to kind of go with the flow at the moment, and a lot of people are getting back to more regular schedules they had before we went into the pandemic, and so we're going to see how that all affects us. And obviously, I guess we're probably going to still do it virtually to a certain degree, but at some point, maybe we're going to try and get together at Mike's place or at some spot to maybe do a
Oh,
physical recording. That might not
it'll,
happen till Anime North, but we'll see
yeah,
what
I'm
happens.
thinking Anime North, but I have there's like there is a to answer the yes or no on whether or not we'll do an episode in person. The short answer before the end of 2022, yes. We just don't know exactly under when and under what circumstances. Hopefully, the latest is Anime North, but like I said, lots going on. But just know we have every intention to be around. Hopefully, I can do a stream and maybe I can introduce, show you the PS5, James. Maybe we'll talk again for a little bit if that announcement is made from Sony. We can at least digest it a little bit on air or something, right?
Yeah, I'll wait and see when that happens. As they say, I know there's rumblings, but there's always rumblings on the video game scene, as we know. So you just take
Yeah,
everything with a grain of salt and see how all the chips fall, right?
I'm still looking forward to seeing what happens in the coming week and in the weeks to come. But I think that's the chat for this afternoon.
So where can they
It,
find us, Mike? Since we had mentioned Captivate, but what other places may people find us?
I'll mention the Captivate site for the podcast again. animeroundtable.captivate.fm. If you want something a little bit more detailed about our show notes and really the other stuff that away from the podcast, animeroundtable.com is our website. As I said, it's always been not really updated. It's hopefully going to be refreshed real soon. So stay tuned for that. We have our guys working on it. Thanks a lot, Mo.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you have your top people working on it.
Well, he is our one. He is our top guy in that
He's
reset.
in, he's in he's in the Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse, just getting things
Yeah.
done.
Oh, he's doing.
Yeah.
He's kept us up to date. He's done, and I know he's doing a good job there. So animeroundtable.com. You can email us animeroundtable@gmail.com. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Anime Roundtable, and just because we have to do something there sooner or later. Twitch.tv/anime roundtable, and we do have a YouTube channel as well. But as for the podcast, once again, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and if possible, give us a review because reviews will always help us in the algorithm, and good reviews will help us maybe find people who wouldn't have known about this show before. And then at this point, Kevin would say,
Well, I think Kevin would say that you give us 5 stars.
Mm-hmm. And as much as I'm saying we may not be able to add anything in the next at least week, we always endeavor to add something as often as possible. So regardless of where you're hearing this or listening to this or watching this, there's no visuals for this one. Give us a follow or a subscribe, hit that button so you can be informed of whenever we add anything to whatever platforms we're on. So that's the chat. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again, hopefully, for episode 65.